Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into Futuh al-Ghaib, which translates as The Revelations of the Unseen. It's by Hazrat Shaikh Muhyuddin Abdul Qadir Gilani. And we should probably think of this less like a dense old book and more like a series of direct talks.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Direct talks aimed at understanding some pretty fundamental things about us, especially our inner lives.
Right.
And the specific translation we're drawing from by Maulana Aftab-Ud-Din Ahmad actually has this dedication to his uncle.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it highlights this passion for the true teachings of Islam and Sufism. So it underscores that this isn't just, dry academic stuff. It's digging into really profound human experiences.
The inner terrain, as you said.
Exactly, the kind we all navigate.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is basically to pull out the core wisdom from these talks, the guidance that might still resonate, offer something practical today.
Yep, practical insights, understanding ourselves, maybe personal growth, finding perspectives on challenges we face.
Sounds good. So where do we start? How does the text map out this inner landscape?
Well, a really crucial starting point is the Sheikh's breakdown of the three states of the self, the nafs, as it's called.
Nafs, okay.
He presents it kind of like a journey. And it begins with the nafs amara.
Nafs amara. That sounds like the part of us that just wants what it wants now, kind of impulsive.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. It's described as the unruly, almost animal self, driven by urges, impatient, maybe lacking a strong conscience yet.
Right.
And the text suggests that a lot of religious or spiritual training is aimed squarely at addressing this state, refining it.
Like the basic operating system needing some updates.
Yeah, exactly. The raw material.
So, okay, that's recognizing our basic instincts. What's the next step on this journey of self-awareness then?
The second stage is called the nafs lawama.
Lawama.
Yeah. This is where the self starts to wake up, morally speaking. It's described as struggling, beginning to realize God, maybe.
So internal conflict starts.
Definitely. You get this dawning sense of right and wrong. And importantly, you feel regret or repentance after you make a mistake.
Ah, okay. That's the conscience kicking in, that I should have known better feeling.
Exactly that. It's a state many of us know very well, I think.
For sure. And where does this internal struggle ideally lead? What's the third state?
The goal, or the culmination, is the nafs mutmainah,
Mutmainah.
the composed, God-realized self. This is described as a state of real peace, inner purity, rectitude, and deep knowledge or understanding.
Contentment, basically.
Yeah, contentment and alignment, being truly settled and connected to something larger.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like the ultimate inner upgrade. Now, the text also mentions 3 stages of spiritual ascent: Fana, Baka, and Lika. How do these relate to the states of the self?
They're very closely linked. They represent the actual process of moving beyond the limits of that lower self, the nafs amara, towards a closer connection with the divine.
Okay.
And the first stage is fana.
Fana, annihilation. That sounds pretty intense.
It does, but it refers more to the annihilation of the dominance of that animal self, the nafs amara.
Ah, okay. Not literal disappearance.
Right. It's more like the constant pull of worldly desires starts to lose its grip on you. The text says the only urge really left is this kind of prayerful surrender.
Like silencing the ego's noise.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Silencing that constant chatter.
So once that ego-driven self fades back a bit, what comes next? What emerges?
The next stage is baka. This means, roughly, subsistence or permanence in God.
Okay.
Again, it's not a literal merging, but it's like the spirit is restored, but in a purified way. You're free from the sway of those base passions.
And how does that affect how someone acts?
Well, the idea is that you start acting in the world without violating others' rights. And interestingly, the text says you're only really moved or disturbed by God's command or will at this point. And as a result, your actions naturally become beneficial for humanity, for creation in general. You move from self-interest to, like, a genuine care for the whole.
That's a profound shift. Okay. And then the third stage, Lika, meeting with God.
Yes, Lika. This is where spiritual knowledge and insight reach a really high point. Faith, devotion, they deepen incredibly. There's this profound sense of certainty.
Certainty.
Yeah, like an experience the text describes as if seeing God face to face. You're freed from anxieties about the future, regrets about the past, doubts, misgivings. They just dissolve.
Wow.
Devotion takes on the color of God's attributes, and receiving certain spiritual powers or gifts becomes, part of your reality, part of your history. But it's emphasized this comes after Fana and Baka, and it's granted by God's grace.
It's not something you just achieve through effort alone.
Exactly, it's a gift.
That paints a picture of really deep spiritual realization. Now, shifting slightly, the text also mentions a hierarchy of saints, or aliyah. It uses terms like badal, goth, and qutub. Can you unpack this for us?
Sure, so Aulia means saints or friends of God. And within this Sufi understanding, there are different roles or ranks. Badal means substitutes. Yeah, they're described as righteous people whose very existence is essential for the world's spiritual balance. If one passes away, God substitutes another.
So they're like vital foundational figures.
Exactly. The text says they're lowest in this specific rank structure, but still incredibly important spiritually. Kind of like hidden pillars.
Okay. What about goth and qutub? They sound more prominent.
They are. These terms signify the highest levels of spiritual authority. They're seen as preeminently holy, sometimes associated with miracle working.
Okay.
The qutub, which means axis or pivot, is considered the chief among the Badal and the Goth. He's recognized by the Badal, his agents, so to speak.
The central point.
Right. And Goth literally means aid or succor, especially in difficulty. So it highlights their role as powerful spiritual helpers.
A fascinating structure. Okay, let's get more into the practical advice. The book is a series of discourses. Can we look at some specific examples? What about the fourth discourse? It mentions rewards for overcoming desires.
Ah, yes, the fourth discourse paints a very vivid picture. It promises significant rewards in the afterlife for those who essentially die to their fleshly desires while still alive.
Rewards like what?
Things like wealth without poverty, happiness without any sorrow, total security without fear, knowledge without ignorance, honor that can't be taken away.
Wow, pretty absolute states.
Very. And ultimately, nearness to God. It even goes so far as to say such a person becomes like a successor to every prophet and a pinnacle of saintliness.
That's a powerful incentive for self-mastery.
Definitely highlights the transformative potential.
Then the fifth discourse talks about the world being deceptive. How does it suggest we deal with that?
The fifth discourse uses this interesting imagery. It says the world might look appealing on the outside, but from the inside, it's injurious, easily touched, and sort of killed.
So don't be fooled by appearances.
Pretty much. The advice is to turn your focus inward. Turn away from what it calls the foul smell of one's own sensuality. Focus inward to attain your true appointed portion, your spiritual destiny, basically.
Cultivate the inner garden, not just the facade.
Exactly. Look beyond the surface glitter.
Okay. And the sixth discourse. It talks about vanishing from one's own desires and will. Why?
The sixth discourse explains this vanishing as becoming an open vessel for God's knowledge. By discarding your own efforts aimed purely at worldly gain and focusing only on God.
You create space.
You create space. You stop trying to fill yourself with your own plans and agendas, and you become receptive to divine wisdom and guidance, like becoming a clear channel instead of a blocked one.
Aligning your will with something higher makes sense. Now, what about when life throws stuff at us we don't like? The eighth discourse tackles this.
Yes, the eighth discourse is very practical about difficult situations. It advises patience and contentment with God's decree.
Acceptance.
Acceptance, but also trust. Recognizing that all good ultimately comes from God, and often what he ordains, even if it feels bad at the time, is actually better than what we thought we wanted.
Trusting the bigger picture, even when it's blurry.
Precisely. A tough one, but valuable.
Definitely. Then the 10th discourse points out a kind of tension, an opposition between the self and God. How do we resolve that?
It puts it quite starkly. There's God, and then there's ourself, our ego, and they're often pulling in opposite directions.
Right.
The discourse argues that true friendliness towards God is what brings real honor and provides everything we actually need. The key is to stop placing so much importance on our own human effort and to recognize God as the ultimate planner, the ultimate orchestrator.
A shift from self-reliance to God-reliance.
Exactly. Humility and perspective.
And speaking of difficulties, the 15th discourse revisits hardships. What's the take there?
The 15th discourse frames hardships not just as something to endure, but as a way the soul gets refined, polished, elevated.
Like a purification process.
Yes. It assures that true happiness and blessings inevitably follow periods of patience and obedience through trials. Like tempering steel, the difficulty makes you stronger, better.
A more constructive view of adversity. Okay. The 16th discourse talks about what keeps us away from God's blessing. What are the main culprits?
According to the 16th discourse, the big barrier is relying too heavily on other people, or on means like our job, our skills, material things, instead of relying ultimately on God.
So misplaced trust.
Exactly. It clarifies that earning a living lawfully is good, it's favored, but the core issue is where your ultimate dependence lies. Turning away from any form of polytheism, meaning giving ultimate power or reliance to anything besides God, is what brings you closer.
Centering your faith, basically.
That's it, knowing the true source.
Now, the 17th discourse goes back to that idea of union with God, fauna. Does it clarify if we lose ourselves completely in that?
It does offer clarification. It suggests that this union, fauna, doesn't mean your created identity is just wiped out.
Okay.
The Shaikh uses the analogy of being like a wet nurse for the seeker guiding, nurturing. So the union is more about profound connection, deep understanding, shared will perhaps, rather than absorption to the point of annihilation of the self.
More like harmony than dissolution.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
The 18th discourse warns about taking credit for blessings. Why is that such a danger?
It's about the danger of pride, really, forgetting the source. The 18th discourse stresses how vital it is to always see God as the origin of all good things in your life.
And avoid complacency.
Avoid complacency. Avoid feeling comfortable with anything that creates distance from Him. It's about maintaining that humility and gratitude. Recognize grace constantly.
Humility keeps coming up. It seems central. The 24th discourse pushes this further, encouraging complete submission to God's will. What does that look like in practice?
It calls for a total surrender. Applying all your power, all your energy to obeying God, but doing so with humility and, importantly, truthfulness, sincerity in your heart and actions.
It's about intention as much as action.
Absolutely. Aligning both with the divine purpose as you understand it.
Okay. The 27th discourse uses an interesting allegory, two trees.
Right. An allegory of two trees growing from the same root. One yields sweet fruit symbolizing good influences, good paths. The other bears bitter fruit, evil influences, wrong paths.
Simple but effective.
Very. The advice is straightforward. Recognize both exist, strive for the sweet branch, nurture that, and actively guard against the pull of the bitter one. Choose righteousness.
A clear metaphor for navigating choices. Then the 35th discourse talks about abstinence. Why is abstaining from unlawful things so foundational?
It's presented as the very bedrock of religion. Abstinence from the forbidden, the unlawful, is seen as the essential foundation for any real spiritual progress and also as a form of protection.
Can't build without a solid base.
Exactly. It's non-negotiable, a starting point.
And the 36th tackles that perennial issue, balancing worldly life with spiritual life. How does it guide us?
It advises ordering your life so that the concerns of the afterlife take precedence over purely worldly pursuits. It's a warning, really, against letting the stresses and demands of this life completely overshadow your service to God and your focus on what's eternal.
Keeping the long game in view.
Right, maintaining that ultimate perspective.
The 45th discourse mentions two kinds of people under trial, the blessed and the afflicted. What's the common thread?
The common thread is that both situations are trials from God. Prosperity can be just as much a test as hardship.
Oh, okay.
The real blessing, the text suggests, isn't the circumstance itself, but the ability to recognize God's wisdom and decree within whatever circumstance you're in, ease or difficulty. Seeing both as chances to deepen faith.
That levels the playing field, in a way. Both are opportunities.
Exactly.
Then the 56th discourse describes a true servant of God. What are their key characteristics?
A true servant, according to this discourse, is someone who has essentially vanished from being preoccupied with creation, with people, things, worldly status.
Detached.
Detached, yes.
Okay.
And desires nothing except what God wills. They've moved beyond selfish wants and are fully aligned with the divine purpose. It's a state of profound surrender.
Total alignment. Okay. The 64th touches on something very human that disturbed inner self. The longing for a life without death. What's the insight there?
It acknowledges that restlessness, that deep-seated desire we have for permanence, for an end to suffering and death,
Yeah.
but it gently redirects that longing. It suggests that true life, everlasting life, is found with God, implying a spiritual immortality, a connection that transcends physical death, rather than just endless earthly existence.
Shifting the definition of life.
Exactly, a shift in focus.
And finally, the 78th discourse gives a list 10 characteristics of someone who's reached a high spiritual station. Can you give us the highlights?
Sure, it's a very practical, ethical checklist almost. It includes things like avoiding swearing oaths falsely, avoiding lying, never breaking a promise, not cursing others, not harming others physically or otherwise.
Core ethic.
Very core. Also, avoiding polytheism in any form, steering clear of hypocrisy, avoiding greed and pride, and, crucially, not being ungrateful. These 10 are presented as clear signs of someone who has genuinely progressed on the spiritual path.
That's a solid moral compass right there. It really feels like Futuh al-Ghaib, these revelations, offer just a wealth of insight.
Absolutely. It maps out this journey, understanding the self, ascending beyond its limitations, and offers really practical ways to navigate life while keeping that spiritual connection central. It's a timeless guide in many ways.
So, wrapping this up, our deep dive really underscores this consistent theme. The importance of inner work, of transformation, understanding our own makeup, letting go of the ego's grip, the base desires, and actively striving for that connection with the divine, living consciously.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's not just theory. It's packed with actionable principles for how you approach your life, day to day.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. It really does leave us, and you listening, with something to think about. Given these ancient principles about inner work, about spiritual growth, how might they offer you a different lens, a fresh perspective on the challenges and opportunities you face in your life right now in the modern world? Something worth mulling over.